In the heart of the Himalayas lies a towering giant, the mighty Nanga Parbat, resting in the remote Gilgit region. The mountain proudly claims to be the ninth highest globally, a breaking challenge at 8,126 meters above sea level. However, beneath its grandeur lies a history of terrible mountaineering disasters that have left their mark on its formidable slopes. You might be familiar with the fact that the climbing community has named Nanga Parbat the Killer Mountain because it's just so dangerous. This name comes from many mountaineers who have died trying to climb the huge mountain. So without further ado, let's dive into some of the most jaw-dropping incidents on this mountain and what happened during these incidences. Let's get started. So back in January 2018, a small expedition team arrived at the foot of Nanga Parbat's western face and set up their base camp. They were getting ready to try to climb the top of Nanga Parbat during the winter climbing season, which is so hard that it was only done for the first time in 2016. A Polish man named Tomasz Makiewicz was also part of the 2018 team. Do remember that Tomasz had already tried 7 times to reach the top of Nanga Parbat in the winter, so he was used to the hard conditions he would face this time. With Tomasz was a well-known French mountaineer named Elisabeth Revol. She had been with Makiewicz on 3 previous summit tries. They were experienced polar climbers, so figuring out how to reach the top wasn't hard for them. The two would travel light and set up their camps as they got closer to the top to return to base camp quickly after taking some time to get used to the altitude. By January 24th, Makiewicz and Revol had reached their Camp 3 sites at 7,800 meters and were ready to start their last push to the top. This last push to the summit would not be easy, as the two climbers would have to deal with air temperatures around negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit as they made their way to the death zone at 8,000 meters and up to the top. The death zone on the Nanga Parbat is where a person can't stay alive for more than a few days, even if they rest. This is because there isn't enough oxygen in the air. The pair's problem were made worse by Killer Mountain's notoriously bad winter weather and the fact that the last part of the journey to the summit was out in the open. This means that the climbers were sure to face a barrage of high winds and snowfall, which always hit the slopes of Nanga Parbat in the winter. The two began their trip to the summit on the morning of January 25th. Even though the odds were against them, they made it to the top of Nanga Parbat later that day, becoming the second group to do so in the winter. But they didn't have much time to enjoy their success because a strong storm was coming towards the mountain, making the weather more and more scary for the two. Unfortunately, the weather on the mountain kept getting worse, and the two hikers soon got lost as they tried to get down the mountain in the cold and wind. Soon after they started going down, Tomasz told Elizabeth he couldn't see because of the snow blindness. This made things even harder for the two. Tomasz clung to Elizabeth's shoulder as the two of them slowly descended. Tomasz had not worn an oxygen mask earlier in the climb because it was so hazy, but as night fell, he started having difficulty breathing. This was a sign that he was getting sick from the high altitude. The cold badly hurt Elizabeth and Tomasz, but they got down to about 7,280 meters, where they set up a tent and snuggled together to stay warm. Elizabeth sent out a lot of text messages and radio calls asking for help. As the hours went by, Tomas's condition worsened, and he started to show signs of late-stage severe altitude sickness, which could very well be fatal. He was very tired and blood was coming out of his mouth. Eventually, Elizabeth was able to get in touch with the outside world so they could start trying to rescue the two. However, she was told that because of their high altitude and the strong storm hitting the mountain, they would need to go down to about 6,800 meters before rescuers could reach them. On the 27th, Elizabeth made the hard choice to try to descend alone and tell the rescuers where Thomas was. She left him with most of her supplies, including her sleeping bag, so that he could stay warm and alive for as long as possible. By the end of the day on the 27th, Elizabeth had made it down to an altitude of 6,700 meters, but she soon realized that the relief party hadn't come. As the sun went down, she had to find shelter in another small crevices because she didn't have a sleeping bag or a fire to keep her warm for another cold night in the storm. Fortunately for Elizabeth, Dennis Urboko and Adam Bilicki two climbers at the base camp of K2 had heard about her call for help. They were getting ready to try to be the first team to reach the top of the mountain in the winter. When they heard the news, the two experienced climbers offered to help the injured climbers on Nanga Parbat. Two other climbers from their K2 expedition, Piotr Tomala and Jaroslav Boder, joined them. Even though the storm on Nanga Parbat hadn't ended by the morning of the 27th, the rescue team ordered that a helicopter, which had been crowdfunded to assist in saving the two individuals on Nanga Parbat, transport them as high as possible. From that point out, the team was intended to complete the rescue on foot. The chopper dropped the four men off at the altitude of 4,800 meters, beyond which it could face technical difficulties. Dennis and Adam started up the mountain to hunt for Thomas and Elizabeth, while the other two men stayed behind to build up a tent. Dennis and Adam struggled hard to summit Nanga Parbat, which was very cold and challenging. They also asked Elizabeth to start coming down. Dennis and Adam called out to Elizabeth at 3 a.m. On January 28th, they heard her answer, and although it was almost entirely dark, they ended up finding her. To their surprise, though, they soon learned that she was in worse shape than predicted. Elizabeth was hallucinating because of altitude sickness and lost one of her shoes while in the crevices. Even though Revol was not in great form, she implored the two rescuers to keep trekking up the mountain to save Thomas. However, the two rescuers refused since the weather on the mountain was horrible, with wind blowing at a continuous 50 miles per hour. This also meant a wind chill of roughly negative 80 degrees Fahrenheit. One rescue crew member noted in his diary the weather on the mountain, calling it the forecast of evil. They are coming back, but there is no Thomas, he wrote. Elizabeth, together with Dennis and Adam, endured the chilly walk to the bivouac for a period of 5 hours. After they had returned to base camp, Elizabeth was airlifted to the nearby medical facility in a helicopter for further treatment. However, the weather on Nanga Parbat did not improve over the next 3 days. As a result, any additional rescue operations to find Thomas and bring him down from the mountain, where he was very certainly already dead, were discontinued. This is where his heartbroken wife took to social media to say how she would do anything to have Tomas back. Even though her husband's passing must have caused her great sorrow, Tomas's wife seemed satisfied that her late husband had finally accomplished his lifelong ambition of climbing Nanga Parbat during the winter. This had been one of his goals for a very long time. Tomas Makiewicz was a man who was remembered for his strength of character. You may be surprised to learn that as early as 1990, he was a heroin addict. Nevertheless, by the time he reached the end of his life, he had changed so drastically that he was willing to climb a mountain as risky as Nanga Parbat, and that too in the winter, when the risk was at its highest point. However, perhaps it's not the wisest option to climb some of the most dangerous mountains in the world during some of the most dangerous seasons in the world. After all, Mother Nature is not an entity that should be trifled with in any way. After only 1 year had passed since the formidable Nanga Parbat claiming the life of Tomas, a second climbing duo was getting ready to embark on an adventure of their own. Little did they know that things might not go the way that they had planned. Thomas Ballard and Danielle Nardi set out to climb Nanga Parbat back in February 2019, 1 year after Tomas's tragic demise. Tom and Danielle were exceptionally good at what they did and loved this part of their life. They would often have to deal with problems that came out of the blue and were life-threatening. This adventure would test their skills and bravery as well. Let's look at how the events unfolded during the 2019 accident at Nanga Parbat. Both climbers had an interesting life story. Tom Ballard was born in England in 1988, and his parents, Jim Ballard and Alison Hargraves, are also well-known mountain hikers. Alison, his mother, was the first to climb Mount Everest without extra air. She died on K2 in 1995 when Tom was only 6. This was a dark event in Tom's life. Even though his mother died too soon, Tom took after her love of climbing and became a very skilled climber in his own right. So Ballard and Danielle Nardi had met for the first time in 2017 on a foreign expedition team. Another climber, Kate, who was Ballard's sister, was also on the trip. They tried to climb the northeast wall of Lahakbak Ri, a peak of the Karakoram Mountains with a height of 7,041 meters. During this trip, avalanches and snow made it impossible for them to reach the top. They had a great time though, and they quickly became good friends. Even though they were from different parts of the world, they felt they had something in common. Similarly, Daniel Nardi was an Italian climber who was born in the town of Sisi. He was known for how much he loved climbing and how many famous peaks he climbed. Daniel started climbing when he was young and soon became known as a skilled and experienced climber. He had plenty of climbing experience, from alpine climbing to big walls, and had climbed in many different mountain areas around the world, such as Himalayas, the Andes, and of course, the Savage Mountain K2. So Nardi and Ballard went to Pakistan in December 2018. They were getting ready to climb Nanga Parbat and wanted to try a different path, the famous Mountaineering Spur. The Mountaineering Spur is a well-known, beautiful, and historic path, but is also dangerous because avalanches always seem to hit it every now and then. This makes things incredibly more difficult. Nardi was eager to finish the Mountaineering Spur climb in the winter because he had tried to do it before and failed. No one was surprised when he returned in 2018, but the fact that Ballard was part of the plan made people wonder. At the end of the day, Nanga Parbat was a big step for him. He had never been above 6,000 meters before, so this was an important thing for him to do. In 1970, only Reinhold Messner and his brother Gunther climbed this route with Nardi, Ballard, and Nardi's climbing partner, Elizabeth Revol. Gunther had gotten sick from being at a high level after he went down, and sadly, he died close to the base. It is most definitely the riskiest way up Nanga Parbat. In the same way, in 2016, Simone Moreau became the first to climb Nanga Parbat in the winter. He was the only person to climb 4 8,000-meter peaks for the first time in the winter. He famously said, "To go to an 8,000-meter peak for the first time in the winter on a new route, which is the Mountaineering Spur, is not the obvious way to start a high-altitude career. That was a very hardcore beginning." On December 29, 2018, Ballard posted a beautiful picture of Nanga Parbat on Instagram. "Our goal is right in front of our eyes. So close you could almost touch it," he wrote. Ballard and Nardi set out to climb Nanga Parbat, one of the world's most difficult mountains. The climb was hard because they had to endure deep snow and bad weather. Extending periods of time were spent with the climbers confined to their tents, where temperatures frequently plummeted below freezing. They spent the windy days at base camp, keeping their strength up by climbing on big rocks. The climbers moved up the Memory Road on warm days with good weather, setting up their first camp, then their second camp, and finally their third camp at an altitude of 5,700 meters. Even though the third camp was in a valley and the winds were extremely strong, the two still managed to get the job done. Ballard and Nardi tried many times to get to Camp 2 and 3, but the conditions were too dangerous. Avalanches were a threat, so they had to go back without setting up camp. Every time they went back, they found their tents buried by an avalanche. They even went back from Camp 1 because they didn't think the road was safe, which was a good choice when a huge avalanche hits the area soon after. One view of the tents covered in snow can show how bad the conditions were and how hard it can get to the higher camps. Even though there were problems, they kept trying to reach the top, which showed how determined and strong-willed they were. On February 10, 2019, Ballard posted a picture of himself and a lot of snow on Instagram. He was breaking trail to Camp 1 again. Unfortunately, that was the last post made by Ballard, which was a shame. Nardi spoke with one of his admirers in Italy on the afternoon of February 24, 2019, using his Thurea satellite phone. During this call, he provided them with an update on the situation. He knew that he and Ballard were 6,300 meters above sea level thanks to the GPS data that was transmitting during that communication. During the course of that call, Nardi shared that they were preparing to descend to an altitude of 6,000 meters in order to construct a shelter for Camp 4 as a storm was approaching the mountain. Later on that same night, Nardi checked in with his wife by calling her. He dialed the base camp number again and informed the people that they were moving on to Camp 3, which was 5,700 meters away. The circumstance was very unfortunate. After Nardi and his wife had their final conversation with one another on February 24th, the climbers were no longer within range to communicate with one another and were unable to do so. In the days that followed, there were no signs of life, and neither GPS coordinates nor satellite readings could be picked up on the mountain. An effort was made on a global scale to rescue them from hazardous circumstances, as their families and support workers were unable to contact them During the poor weather and political turmoil on the border between India and Pakistan, locating the people who required assistance was tough. Even though the climbers on Memory Spur were observed through a telescope for the first week, there was no indication that they were moving or communicating with one another. On February 27, 2019, the weather on Nanga Parbat was finally good, but the search team at the base camp could not find Danielle and Tom Ballard. In Pakistan, a helicopter was getting ready to take off. Ali Sadpara, an expert mountain climber, was on board. The job was to look around the area. Since Sunday afternoon, Nardi and Ballard had not talked to each other by satellite phone or radio from their base camp, where a contact officer and 2 cooks were staying. The first touch with base camp happened on February 27th at 6:30 a.m. After keeping a close eye on the hiker's path and possible escape routes, like the Kinshasa route, it was clear that they were not moving. Pakistan's rescue system was turned on, and a chopper was sent to the mountain to look for the people. Together with the Pakistani agency, Nardi's agency called on the help of Askari's company. This company has a deal with the government to use military helicopters for civilian rescue operations. All the required paperwork was done in a few hours, and by 9:30 a.m. Italian time, the helicopter was ready to leave from the heliport in Skardu, a 40-minute ride from the base on the Daimir side of Nanga Parbat. The Pakistani agency also got approval for a Pakistani mountaineer named Ali Sadpar, who had climbed Nanga Parbat the winter before, to help the pilots with reconnaissance and possible rescue missions. Pakistani airspace was stopped because of a national emergency caused by the war between Pakistan and India. All of the news services revealed that the chopper could not leave Skardu. Later, Pakistani mountaineer Karim Hayat was permitted to leave Islamabad by land on the trip with Nardi and Ballard until late January. On February 28th, he was supposed to get to the base. Meanwhile, Ambassador Stefano Pontecorvo did everything he could to find an answer and asked the British embassy for help. They asked the Pakistani government to do something different and send a plane to the base camp. According to what they said, people from Kazakhstan, Russia, and Kyrgyzstan who were on the K2 winter trip were asked if they could help with the rescue on Nanga Parbat. The team decided the 4 climbers would go. Later, the team led by Vasily Pivstov, a Kazakh, and Alex Chikhin, a Russian, had to return to base camp because strong winds were more than 70 kilometers per hour made it impossible to continue climbing. A Pakistani climber named Muhammad Ali Sadpara wrote on Facebook that he would like the highly skilled and acclaimed winter climbers from K2 to help with the search. Through the social media of the Russian mission, they found out that someone wanted them to help, but this was based on an unrealistic hope since K2 base camp is in a limited area now closed because of Pakistani's military emergency. In the meantime, they were waiting for news from the base camp about what was happening on the mountain, which was being closely watched in case the Pakistani military emergency was lifted and Ali Sadpar could get to the base camp before nightfall. As tensions between Pakistan and India grew, the helicopter trip that was supposed to look for the missing climbers on Nanga Parbat seemed impossible. But Ambassador Stefano Pontecorvo didn't give up. His persistence paid off, and the flight was finally permitted to take off. Even though they had to wait, the team at base camp was determined to keep looking. As night fell on the mountain, they stayed on the lookout for any signs of life. They looked for Nardi and Ballard on foot in the Daimir Valley and the chopper, fully determined to find them and bring them home safely. With permission from the Pakistan Air Force, Ali Sadpara and 2 Pakistani climbers finally took off from Skardu to Nanga Parbat on February 28th. They had been waiting for a while. This choice was made after talking to the rescue group about how to make the most of the last few hours of good weather and visibility because the weather was supposed to worsen. The Pakistani Air Force says that a rescue flight was flown over Memory Spur, but there was no sign of the climbers. The chopper then went back to the nearest helicopter to get more fuel. Soon it would start a new mission to look around. At the Nanga Parbat camp, Ali Sadpar was in charge. Ali Sadpar says that the chopper flew over Camp 3 and saw a deserted, overgrown tent that had been left there. Signs of an avalanche were also found on the hill, which shows how dangerous the area is. On February 28th, 2 planes left Skardu early in the morning to go to the K2 base camp. As soon as they arrived, they picked up 4 hikers led by Russian Vasily Pivstov, Ali Sadpara, Imtiaz Hussain, and Dilawar Hussain, were all from Pakistan and joined the group to help save the people. On March 1st, 2019, Nardi and Ballard were still nowhere to be found. Efforts to save people went on all night. With close coordination at the organizational level and with the government, with the help of Pakistani military, the embassy was working on getting all the appropriate permissions for the helicopters to fly. The idea was to move Basque Mountain, Alex Chikin, and 3 staff members from the K2 base camp to the Nanga Parbat base camp, and then move them closer to the Daimir face towards Camp 1. Chikin would search the area from a high place with 3 strong drones. The Russian team on K2 didn't join because there was a high chance of a slide on Nanga Parbat. Pakistani airspace was closed, so people had to wait for flight permits. Ambassador Pontecorvo was constantly in touch with the Pakistani Air Force and the group that helped. On March 3, 2019 at 12:30 p.m., 2 Pakistani military helicopters took off and went quickly to the K2 base camp, where they picked up Alex Chikin, his team, and their gear. Then they flew back to base camp and to Camp 1, where the cooks, the contact officer, Ali Sadpara, and 2 other Pakistani mountaineers prepared for their landing. Heavy snowfall made it take longer for the 2 planes to land on the mountain. Because of an emergency, the pilot had to stop in Jaglot and then go back to Skardu. If the weather would be better on March 4th, the next try to land would be made. On March 6th, the recovery team said that they heard from Alex Chikin, who had used a powerful telescope to see 2 shadows. The team planned to take a helicopter flight to check the sighting, but when the day came, the Pakistani army called the helicopter back for other work. It took a few days to figure out who the shadow was. Even though it would be hard to get to the bodies, the relief team said they would do everything possible to get them. The silhouettes were later proven to be of Tom Ballard and Danielle Nardi on March 9th. Ambassador Stefano Pontecorvo announced this on Twitter, confirming the identities and formally announcing the rescue operation had ceased. There have been many ways to remember the sad death of Tom Ballard and Danielle Nardi. In honor of them, their families and friends have set up memorial funds, and several articles and films have been made. One example is the 2019 documentary, The Last Mountain, about Tom Ballard and Danielle Nardi's death climbing Nanga Parbat. The documentary shows their trip leading up to the climb, their attempts to get to the top of the mountain, and the following search and rescue effort. It also talks about how much they loved climbing, how ready they were to take risks, and what their death meant for their family and friends. In addition to being a tribute, it shows how dangerous and interesting it is to climb the world's highest mountains. Although Nanga Parbat is the 9th highest mountain in the world, it is the most deadly one globally. The killer mountain has claimed more than 85 lives, putting it just below Mount Everest and K2. While there is little that can be done in the face of Mother Nature, these brave mountaineers have left legacies and lessons for the community that admires their work and contribution. For similar content, feel free to have a look at the clips on your screen. Until then, have a wonderful day.